The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and vanilla candles. Laughter bounced off the walls. My mother's friends were seated around the table, wine glasses half full, phones ready for photos. I waited until the cake was cut. Then I placed the small navy box in front of my parents. "For you," I said. My mother didn't open it. She pushed it aside with 2 fingers, like it was clutter. "We don't need your cheap present," she said lightly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe focus on learning to live on your own first." A few guests shifted in their seats. My stepdad added, "Take it back. We're not raising a mooch forever." The room went quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled and let them keep talking. Have you ever noticed how humiliation feels slower than time itself? And then I laughed softly and said, "You might want to see what's inside." The truth is, I expected the coldness, not the volume, not the way my mother turned it into a performance, but the feeling itself, that familiar chill in the middle of a room, like someone opened a window you didn't know was there. I kept my smile in place because that's what I've done for years. I've learned that if I react, it becomes proof. Proof that I'm dramatic. Proof that I'm unstable. Proof that they were right to speak to me like that. So I sat back down slowly, folded my hands in my lap, and let the air settle. My mother's friend, a woman with bright lipstick and a sharp laugh, tried to fill the silence. "Oh, come on," she said, half joking. "Maybe it's a prank gift." My stepdad snorted. "Prank or not, she should save her money. Mind, she's always struggling." That word hit me harder than the rest. Struggling. As if my life was some messy pile they had to step around. If I'm being honest, my mother and stepdad have always talked about me like I'm a temporary guest in my own adulthood. Like I'm one bad week away from coming back to their doorstep with a suitcase. It started after college. I moved out at 22 into a tiny apartment with thin walls and a sink that leaked. I worked 2 jobs at first, not because I was lazy, because starting is expensive. Life is expensive. But every time I came to family dinners, my mother would glance at my shoes, my phone, my bag, and make that little sound in her throat like she'd found evidence. When my car broke down one winter, I borrowed my stepdad's for 3 days. 3. I paid for gas, I returned it washed. And he still brought it up for months like it was a loan that never ended. "Remember when you needed us," he would say, smiling like it was a joke. My mother would join in. Some people are independent. Some people get comfortable being helped. Comfortable. It didn't matter that I paid my rent, that I worked, that I built my life in small, careful steps. In their minds, needing help once meant I was the type of person who would always need help. Convenient labels are easier than honest understanding. That night at the anniversary dinner, they used the label again because it made them feel bigger, more stable, more respectable in front of their guests. But what they didn't know was that the box on the table wasn't bought in a hurry. It wasn't a last-minute gift. It was the end of a long process, a quiet one. And I had spent months putting it together, arranging it like you would arrange something fragile, something that could change the way people see you. And now, my mother had pushed it aside like it was nothing. My stepdad leaned toward the cake knife, already ready to move on. "So," he said to the guests, loud again, "who wants another slice?" My mother laughed, relieved the attention was back on her. I looked at the box. Then I looked at the faces around the table. The curious eyes, the polite discomfort, the way a few people kept glancing between me and my mother, like they were waiting for the scene to continue. Have you ever felt that pressure? That moment when everyone is silently asking, "What are you going to do now?" I stood up with my chair scraping softly against the tile. I picked up the navy box. And in the calmest voice I could manage, I said, "Before you cut more cake, I need you to listen to me for 1 minute." No one reached for the cake. Even the forks paused midair. My mother rolled her eyes slightly, the way she does when she thinks I'm about to say something emotional. "Make it quick," she said. "We're celebrating." Celebrating. I nodded once and placed the box back in the center of the table. "I know you think I struggle," I began, keeping my tone even. "I know you believe I've never really stood on my own." My stepdad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, defensive, certain. "And," he said, "there it was, that expectation, that I would defend myself with excuses, that I would explain my rent, my bills, my life like I was presenting evidence in a courtroom. For years, I tried to correct them. Like I would list my accomplishments carefully, my savings, my promotions. But every explanation somehow sounded like pleading. So I stopped. Not tonight. Tonight felt different. I looked around the room at the guests. Some avoided my eyes. Others watched closely, like they were seeing a family dynamic unfold in real time. You've always said I couldn't manage on my own, I continued, that I'd come back asking for help. My mother gave a small shrug. We just worry. Worry, is that what it's called when you repeat the same doubt until it sticks? I opened the lid of the navy box slowly. Inside were several envelopes, neatly arranged. Not dramatic, not flashy, just plain white paper against dark velvet lining. My stepdad frowned. What is that paperwork? In a way, I said, but before I explained, my mind drifted briefly because this moment didn't begin tonight. It began years ago. The early signs were subtle. When I got my first promotion, my mother's response wasn't excitement. It was suspicion. Are you sure it's stable? She asked. Don't get ahead of yourself. When I moved to a slightly better apartment, she visited once and said, just don't fall behind on payments. When I mentioned investing a small amount of money, my stepdad laughed lightly. Investing what, exactly? Every success was followed by a warning. Every step forward was met with a reminder of how easily I could fall. At first, I told myself they were protective, practical, older. But protection feels different from prediction. And theirs always sounded like a forecast of failure. Have you ever noticed when someone doesn't celebrate you, but instead prepares for your collapse? I closed the box again gently. Before I explain, I said, looking at my mother, I need to ask something. She shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. Why is it so important for you to believe I can't survive without you? The question hung in the air. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she smiled in that tight way she does when she wants control back. You're overthinking, she said. We just know you. But did they? Did they know the late nights I spent budgeting carefully? The weekends I skipped outings to build something steady? The silent decisions I made to prove nothing? Just to grow? The guests were quiet now. The laughter from earlier had faded completely. My stepdad tapped the table impatiently. If this is about money, just say it. I met his eyes. It is, I said calmly. And this time, I wasn't defending myself. It is, I repeated, keeping my voice level. My stepdad let out a short laugh. I knew it. You need something. The guest shifted again. Someone cleared their throat. The candles on the table flickered slightly from the air vent above us. I didn't sit back down. I don't need anything, I said. That's the point. I opened the first envelope and slid a document onto the table. It wasn't colorful. No bold fonts, just official letterhead and numbers printed in quiet black ink. My mother leaned forward despite herself. What is this? She asked. It's the closing statement from the property sale, I said. The townhouse I bought 3 years ago. The word bought seemed to echo in the room. My stepdad's arms slowly uncrossed. I rented it out, I continued. Knight paid it off faster than planned, sold it last month. No one interrupted this time. Another envelope, another document. This is the statement from the small business account I opened 2 years ago. I didn't say the word investment yet. I let the numbers speak first. Have you ever watched someone's expression change when reality doesn't match the story they've been telling about you? My mother picked up the paper with slightly trembling fingers. You never mentioned this, she said. You never asked, I replied gently. For a moment, no one moved. The guests weren't laughing anymore. They were staring at the papers like they were trying to solve a puzzle. My stepdad leaned closer, squinting. How much did you make from this? I gave him the number calmly. It wasn't flashy rich. It wasn't celebrity money. But it was enough. Enough to erase every joke about borrowing cars. Enough to silence the word mooch. He sat back slowly. My mother's face had lost its confident brightness. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. I thought about that carefully. Why didn't I? Because every time I mentioned something positive, it was met with doubt. Because I was tired of defending myself. Because part of me wanted to see if they would ever notice on their own. I didn't need validation, I said simply. I needed peace. The room felt heavier now. The earlier humiliation had shifted into something else. Awareness. My stepdad's voice came out softer. So, what's the box for? I looked at the navy velvet lining again, at the final envelope still resting inside. This, I said, lifting it carefully, is the transfer confirmation. My mother blinked. I transfer? I was going to surprise you, I explained. I set aside a portion of the sale to help you refinance this house, lower the interest rate, take some pressure off. A small murmur passed around the table. But since I'm a mooch, I added quietly, I thought maybe you wouldn't want help from someone who can't live on her own? Silence. Not dramatic silence. Not explosive. Just the kind that reveals more than shouting ever could. My mother stared at the envelope like it was fragile. My stepdad's jaw tightened slightly, and for the first time in years, neither of them had a ready-made label to place on me. The candles kept burning. The cake sat untouched. The room smelled faintly of melted sugar and something else now. Regret. No one reached for the envelope. Not my mother, not my stepdad. Alma just sat there between the plates and crumbs, heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. My mother finally spoke, but her voice had lost its earlier sharpness. You were going to help us? I nodded once. Yes. My stepdad cleared his throat. We didn't ask for that. That's true, I said. You didn't. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Because I could see it now. The story they had built about me was cracking in real time. And people don't like when their stories collapse in front of witnesses. One of the guests shifted awkwardly. Another reached for her phone, pretending to check a message. My mother pushed her chair back slightly. You should have told us, she repeated, but it sounded less like blame and more like confusion. I studied her face carefully. For years, I had tried to earn pride from her. I dressed more polished at family events. I spoke carefully about my plans. I avoided mentioning struggles. I even downplayed my successes so she wouldn't feel threatened. But none of that worked. Because this was never about information. It was about control. Have you ever realized that someone needs you to be small so they can feel big? I closed the navy box gently. I wasn't hiding, I said. I was building. My stepdad stood up, restless. So, what now? You want applause? The old version of me might have tried to soften things, might have laughed it off, might have said, no, of course not, I just wanted to share. But something inside me had shifted long before tonight. I don't want anything, I answered. I came to celebrate your anniversary. I brought a gift. It was rejected. The words weren't loud, they were precise. My mother looked around the table as if searching for support. But no one jumped in to rescue her. Because what could they say? That I should be grateful for being insulted? That I should accept being called dependent while holding documents proving otherwise? The power dynamic had flipped quietly. Not because I attacked them, because I stopped defending myself. My stepdad rubbed his forehead. You're making this dramatic. I almost smiled at that. No, I said calmly. You did. The air in the room felt thicker now. The earlier laughter had been replaced with something more fragile. I picked up the box. I don't need you to refinance the house, I continued. I don't need approval, and I definitely don't need to be called a mooch in front of guests. My mother's lips pressed together. For the first time, she looked unsure, and that was new. I turned toward the door slowly. Behind me, I heard my stepdad say my name. Not loudly, not harshly, just uncertain. But I didn't stop, because the shift wasn't happening in that room. It was happening inside me. My hand was already on the doorknob when my mother's voice rose behind me. Wait! It wasn't a command this time. It sounded thinner, almost unsteady. I paused but didn't turn around immediately. The hallway outside was dimmer than the dining room. The smell of perfume and roasted food faded as cooler air touched my face. For a second, I considered leaving without another word. Wouldn't that have been simpler? But footsteps approached. My stepdad came first. You can't just drop something like that and walk out, he said, though the edge in his tone had softened. I turned slowly. I didn't drop it, I replied. You pushed it away. My mother stood behind him, arms wrapped around herself. The guests were pretending not to listen, but their silence was louder than before. This is embarrassing, she said quietly. I held her gaze. It was embarrassing, I corrected gently, when you called me a mooch. The words sounded different now, smaller, less powerful. My stepdad exhaled sharply. We were joking. Were you? I asked. Have you ever noticed how jokes only seem funny to the person who isn't hurt by them? No one answered. I stepped back into the dining room and placed the navy box on a side table near the wall. Not in the center anymore, not as an offering. I saved for years, I said calmly. I worked extra hours, I skipped trips. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted this to feel like a surprise, not a competition. My mother's eyes flickered toward the box. You were going to pay off part of the house? Refinance, I said. Lower the interest. Free up your monthly cash. My stepdad's shoulders dropped slightly. For the first time, he looked unsettled. And now? He asked. I considered that question carefully. Now. That was the boundary. I don't give gifts where I'm insulted, I answered. The sentence landed cleanly. No anger, no shaking voice. Just fact. My mother swallowed. You're punishing us, I shook my head. No, I'm choosing myself. There's a difference. For years, I accepted their version of me. I tolerated the small remarks, the sideways comments, the constant reminders that I might fail. I laughed along because arguing felt exhausting. But tonight wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. If I handed over that envelope now, after being told to take my cheap present and get out, what would that teach them? That disrespect has no cost? I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. My stepdad's voice softened further. You're overreacting? Maybe I was. Maybe walking away from family money felt extreme. But I thought about all the dinners where I felt smaller than the chair I sat in. All the times I doubted my own progress because their voices echoed louder than my achievements. How long was I supposed to keep absorbing that? I'm not overreacting, I said quietly. I'm done auditioning. The room felt still. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't wait for her approval. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard something I hadn't heard before. Uncertainty. The night air felt colder than I expected. I walked to my car slowly, the sound of distant traffic humming in the background. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt clear. Inside the house, I could faintly hear movement, a door closing, voices lowered. The anniversary music had stopped. For years, I imagined this kind of moment differently. I thought if I ever proved myself, there would be applause, apologies, maybe even tears. But real shifts are quieter. I sat in the driver's seat and placed the navy box on the passenger side. The envelope inside was still sealed. My phone buzzed before I even started the engine. Mom. I watched it ring once, twice. Then it stopped. A second later, another call. Stepdad. I let that one ring too. Have you ever noticed how quickly people call when they realize they miscalculated you? I didn't answer. Not out of revenge, not to punish. But because for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for smoothing things over. On the drive home, streetlights stretched into long golden lines across the windshield. I remembered being 22, sitting in my first tiny apartment, crying quietly after one of their lectures about independence. Back then, I believed I needed to prove something. Tonight, I realized I never did. When I reached my place, I carried the box inside and set it on my kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, mine. I opened the envelope and looked at the transfer confirmation again. The money wasn't going anywhere impulsively. It would stay where it was, invested, growing. I'm secure, just like me. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. We didn't mean it. Call us. Then another. You misunderstood. And finally, please answer. I set the phone face down. Silence isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's self-respect. I made myself tea, sat at the small wooden table, and let the steam rise in front of me. The tension from earlier had dissolved into something steadier. I wasn't angry. I was finished explaining. The calls didn't stop the next day, or the day after that. Voicemails, texts, even a message from one of my mother's friends saying, "You should talk to them, they feel terrible." Feel terrible. I listened to the first voicemail while standing in my kitchen, sunlight stretching across the counter. My mother's voice sounded different, softer. Not sharp, not performative. We didn't realize how it sounded, she said. We were just joking. You know how your stepdad talks? I paused the message. For years, I had explained his tone to myself. That's just how he is. He doesn't mean it. Don't take it personally. But impact matters more than intention. I let the rest of the voicemail play. We're proud of you, she added at the end. We always have been. Always. That word almost made me smile. If pride was always there, why did it only show up when the numbers were undeniable? Have you ever noticed how some people only see your value when it benefits them? I didn't call back immediately. Instead, I went about my day. Grocery shopping, answering emails, watering the small plant by the window that somehow survives my occasional forgetfulness. Normal things, steady things. That evening, and I finally returned the call. My stepdad answered first. His voice lacked its usual certainty. Hey. Hi, I said calmly. There was a pause. We shouldn't have said that, he admitted. It was out of line. Not a dramatic apology, not poetic, but real enough. My mother came on the line next. We didn't know you were doing all that, she said. You never told us. I tried. I replied gently. But every time I shared something, it turned into a warning about failure. Silence. She didn't argue this time. I guess she hesitated. We thought you needed us more than you did. There it was. The truth. Not cruelty, not hatred. Control disguised as concern. I needed encouragement, I said quietly. Not doubt. Another long pause. Then my stepdad cleared his throat. Not so. What happens now? I looked around my apartment, the quiet walls, the steady furniture, the life I built piece by piece. Now, I said, we treat each other like adults. No mocking jokes, no labels, no public comments meant to shrink me. Respect. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it changes everything. They didn't argue. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to. The money stayed invested. The envelope remained sealed. Not as punishment, as a boundary. Over the next few weeks, the tone shifted. Conversations became simpler, less sharp. My stepdad stopped making comments about independence. My mother asked about my work without slipping in warnings. People adjust when they realize the old dynamic no longer works. I didn't laugh that night at the dinner table because I wanted revenge. And I laughed because the story they believed about me was finally collapsing. And I didn't need to raise my voice to make it happen. If this resonates with you, if you've ever been labeled something you've quietly outgrown, take a moment to like this video and share your experience below. Sometimes the strongest shift isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself steady. What would you have done in that moment? Comment below.